My cheating sent me an invite to rub his happiness in my face. He has no idea I just bought the estate where he's getting married. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, grab a warm cup of tea and get comfortable. I'd love to know what time of day you're watching this video. Please comment M for morning, A for afternoon, or E for evening. Now, let me take you into this story. I stood on the travertine terrace of my home, looking out over the infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the California hills. The morning air smelled of jasmine and fresh-cut grass, a scent that always reminded me of how far I had come. My gardener, Manuel, gave me a polite wave from the rose bushes below, and I nodded back, sipping my espresso. It was a perfect, peaceful Tuesday. Until the mail arrived. I usually let my assistant, Sarah, handle the mail. She filtered out the bills, the solicitations, and the fan mail from young women who had read about my anonymous success in business journals. But today, Sarah was out sick, and the bundle of letters sat heavy on the marble kitchen island. One envelope stood out immediately. It wasn't just the size, oversized, rectangular, imposing, it was the texture. Heavy cream linen cardstock, the kind that costs $5 a unit. The return address was embossed in gold leaf, a pretentious script that was barely legible. R&T Sterling. My stomach did a slow, cold flip. Richard. It had been 5 years. 5 years since I had looked into his eyes. 5 years since I had heard his voice. I thought I had scrubbed him from my life completely, like red wine from a white carpet. But here he was, invading my sanctuary. I slid a letter opener under the wax seal, yes, he had actually used a wax seal, and pulled out the card. You are cordially invited to witness the union of Richard Sterling and Tiffany Banks. I let out a dry, humorless laugh that echoed in the empty kitchen. Tiffany. The girl who used to fetch his coffee and accidentally spill it on my paperwork. The girl who called me ma'am with a sickly sweet smile while she was sleeping with my husband in the office I paid for. The date was for this coming Saturday. 3 days away. But it was the handwritten note on the back of the RSVP card that made my blood run cold. Richard's handwriting hadn't changed. It was still jagged, aggressive, pressing so hard into the paper that you could feel the ridges on the other side. Meredith, thought you might want to see what true happiness looks like. You should come. I know things have been hard for you since the divorce. Consider this a night out on me. Try to dress nice. The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't inviting me out of kindness. He wasn't extending an olive branch. He was summoning me to his coronation. He wanted to parade his 26-year-old trophy wife in front of the old, boring ex-wife. He imagined me living in a squalid apartment, wearing rags, bitter and broken. He wanted to see me look at his success with envy. He wanted to feed his ego with my pain. I was about to rip the card in half when my eyes drifted to the bottom line, the location of the ceremony. The Oak Haven Estate. Cape Cod, Massachusetts. My hand froze. The ripping sound died in my throat. I stared at those words, blinking rapidly, sure that I was hallucinating. Oak Haven. I turned around and looked at the stack of documents sitting on the other end of the island, the ones my lawyer, Brenda, had couriered over just 2 hours ago. The ink on my signature was barely dry. I walked over to the stack and flipped open the blue folder. The title deed lay on top. Owner of record, Meredith Morgan, via Blue Sky Holdings LLC. Property description, the Oak Haven Estate, inclusive of all grounds, structures, and existing commercial contracts. A strange sensation washed over me. It started as a bubble in my chest and worked its way up until I was laughing. Not the dry, bitter laugh from before, but a loud, genuine, belly-shaking laugh. Richard was getting married at my house. Well, technically, it was my newest investment property. I had bought the historic estate this morning from a distressed aristocratic family who needed liquid cash fast. It was a blind buy. I hadn't even visited the site recently, trusting Brenda's due diligence. The deal included taking over the existing event calendar. Richard didn't know. He couldn't know. I operated entirely through shell companies. To the world, Oakhaven had been sold to a faceless corporation. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling with adrenaline. I dialed Harrison. "Hey beautiful," his voice was deep, calm, grounding. "I thought you were in meetings all day." "I was," I said, leaning against the counter, tracing the gold letters of Richard's name. "But I just got an invitation to a wedding." "Oh? Who?" "My ex-husband. And his mistress." There was a silence on the line. "Meredith, throw it in the trash. You don't need that energy." "I can't throw it away, Harrison," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "He's holding the wedding at Oakhaven." "The estate you just bought?" Harrison asked, his voice sharpening. "The one we closed on at 9 a.m.? "The very same." "Does he know?" "He thinks I'm a destitute spinster," I said, looking at my reflection in the oven door. The woman staring back wasn't destitute. She was wearing a silk kimono, her skin glowing from expensive serums, her eyes sharp as diamonds. "He invited me to humiliate me, Harrison. He wants me to watch him live the high life in a venue he thinks is the pinnacle of luxury." "He doesn't realize he's a guest in your living room," Harrison chuckled, a dark, rich sound. "So, what are we doing?" "Pack your tuxedo," I said. "The black velvet one. We're going to Cape Cod." "I love it when you get that tone in your voice," Harrison said. "The scary one." "I'm not scary," I smiled, looking at the invitation one last time. "I'm just a gracious host. And I think it's time I welcomed my guests." I hung up the phone. The air in the kitchen felt charged, electric. Richard wanted me to witness his happiness? Fine. I would witness it. But he was about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between looking rich and being powerful. He thought he was the king of the castle. He had no idea the queen had just bought the kingdom. To understand why this moment tasted so sweet, you have to understand the bitterness I had swallowed for 15 years. You have to meet the old Meredith. 15 years ago, I wasn't a shark in the real estate market. I was a 27-year-old financial prodigy with a heart too big for her own good. I had graduated top of my class at Wharton. I had offers from Goldman Sachs, from hedge funds in Chicago. My professors told me I would be a CEO before I was 35. Then I met Richard. He was charismatic, I'll give him that. He had a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was a visionary, or so he claimed, with a billion-dollar idea for a logistics software company. The only problem was, he had no money, no credit, and no idea how to execute a business plan. "We can do this, Meredith," he had pleaded with me one rainy night in our cramped studio apartment. "I have the sales skills. You have the brains. If you help me, if you back me, we'll build an empire. You won't just be a wife, you'll be my partner. My queen." I was young. I was in love. And I was stupid. I turned down the job at Goldman Sachs. My mother, who was dying of cancer at the time, grabbed my hand from her hospital bed. "Meredith," she wheezed, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't give up your light for him. He's a shadow. Shadows only exist when they steal light." "He loves me, Mom," I had argued. "We're building something." When she died a week later, she left me her vintage jewelry collection. It wasn't vast, but it included an emerald necklace from the 1920s and a set of diamond earrings that had been in our family for 3 generations. They were my safety net. My legacy. 2 months later, Richard came home pale and shaking. The bank had denied his business loan. He needed $50,000 to secure the server space for his software, or the whole company would fold before it began. I don't know what to do, he cried, actually putting his head in his hands. I'm a failure, Meredith. I looked at him, and my heart broke. I went to my closet. I took out the velvet box. I walked into the pawn shop downtown, the one with the bars on the windows. The broker, a greasy man with nicotine-stained fingers, offered me a fraction of what the emeralds were worth. Please, I begged, tears streaming down my face. It's my mother's. Can't you do better? Take it or leave it, lady. I took it. I handed the check to Richard that night. He didn't ask where it came from. He just grabbed it, kissed me feverishly, and said, I swear to you, Meredith, I will buy you 10 necklaces to replace this. I swear. For the next decade, I was the invisible backbone of Sterling Logistics. I worked a day job as a bookkeeper to pay our mortgage, and then I came home and worked from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. on Richard's company. I rewrote his disastrous contracts. I created the financial models that got him his series of funding. I coached him on what to say in board meetings. When he offended a major client with his arrogance, I was the one who called the client's wife, smoothed things over, and sent a gift basket, saving the account. I remember one night specifically. It was our 10th anniversary. I had made dinner. Richard didn't come home until midnight. Sorry, he said, loosening his tie, smelling of scotch and expensive cologne. Big meeting. We closed the deal. The Tokyo deal? I gasped. Richard, that's huge. That's the one I spent 3 weeks modeling. Yeah, he grinned. They loved me. They said I was a genius. We should celebrate, I said, reaching for the champagne. Actually, I'm tired, he brushed past me. And honestly, Meredith, don't make a big deal out of it. You just did some spreadsheets. I'm the one who closed it. I stood in the kitchen, holding the bottle, feeling a crack form in my chest. Just some spreadsheets. I was the reason he wasn't in jail for tax evasion. I was the reason his cash flow was positive. But to him, and to the world, I was just the supportive wife who stayed at home. He never gave me shares. He never gave me a title. It's for liability reasons, he lied. If we get sued, we need your assets to be separate. I believed him. I believed that my sacrifice was an investment in us. I didn't know that us was a temporary concept to him, something to be discarded as soon as he could afford an upgrade. The collapse of my life didn't happen in slow motion. It happened with the violence of a car crash. It was a Tuesday in November. I had gone to Richard's office to surprise him with lunch. I had just received news from my doctor that despite my age, my hormone levels were good, we could try for a baby one last time. I was so full of hope. The receptionist, a new girl named Sarah, wouldn't look me in the eye. Is he in? I asked. He's in a meeting, she stammered, shuffling papers nervously. With the new marketing director. I knew the schedule. There was no meeting. I walked past her desk and down the hall. The blinds to Richard's glass-walled office were drawn, but not all the way. There was a 2-inch gap. I stopped. I didn't want to look, but my body moved on its own. Richard was sitting on the leather couch, the one I had picked out for him. Tiffany, the 20-something marketing intern he had hired 3 months ago, was straddling his lap. Her head was thrown back, laughing at something he whispered. His hands were wandering over her with a familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. He looked at her with a hunger he hadn't shown me in years. But worse than the lust was the look of adoration. He looked proud to be with her. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. The shock paralyzed me. I turned around, walked out of the building, and vomited in the decorative planter by the parking garage. When he came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the lunch I had bought him cold and untouched in the trash. "We need to talk," I said. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. He tossed his briefcase on the counter and sighed, as if I were the inconvenience. "I know," he said. "I was going to do this next week, but since you're already in a mood, I want a divorce." "You're sleeping with Tiffany," I stated, my voice trembling. "Tiffany is just a symptom, Meredith," he said cruelly. "The problem is you. You've become stagnant. You're depressed. You're old-fashioned. I run a tech company now. I need someone who fits the brand. Someone exciting. Tiffany has energy. She has vision." "Vision?" I stood up, knocking my chair over. "She's 26. She was asking me how to use the coffee machine 3 weeks ago. I built this company, Richard. I sold my mother's necklace for this company." "Stop throwing that in my face," he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "You did what a wife is supposed to do. You supported your husband. That doesn't make you a co-founder." "I want half," I said. "I want half of everything." Richard laughed. It was a cold, metallic sound. "You won't get a dime. I've had the lawyers restructuring the assets for the last 2 years. Everything is in the Cayman Holdings. The house? Mortgaged to the hilt. The cars? Leased by the corporation. You have no equity, Meredith. On paper, you are a housewife with no income and no contribution." "You can't do that," I whispered. "It's already done. And by the way," he checked his watch, "I need you out. Tiffany is moving in on Friday. I don't want her to have to deal with your negative energy." "This is my house," I cried. "Actually, it's the company's corporate retreat. And your tenancy has been terminated." He went upstairs and started throwing my clothes into garbage bags. I stood there, numb, watching the man I had worshipped for 15 years dismantle my life like it was nothing more than a failed business transaction. That night, he physically escorted me out the front door. It was raining, a cliché, I know, but the universe has a cruel sense of humor. He tossed 2 suitcases onto the wet driveway. "Here's a check for $5,000, he flicked a piece of paper at me. It landed in a puddle. "Consider it severance. Don't call me." He slammed the door. I saw Tiffany's silhouette in the upstairs window, watching. I slept in my car that night in a Walmart parking lot. I curled up in the backseat of my 10-year-old sedan, wrapped in a coat that smelled like the rain, and I didn't sleep. I shook. I shook from the cold, but mostly from the realization of how blind I had been. I had given him my light, just like my mother warned. And he had left me in total, absolute darkness. The next 6 months were a blur of humiliation. I tried to hire lawyers, but Richard was right. He had hidden the money too well. 3 different attorneys told me that fighting him would cost more than I could ever recover. "He's buried the assets in shell companies," one told me. "Without a forensic accountant, which costs $500 an hour, we can't prove anything." I had no money for a forensic accountant. I barely had money for food. I moved into a studio apartment in a neighborhood where police sirens were the nightly lullaby. The walls were paper thin, and the carpet smelled of stale beer. I couldn't get a job in finance. Richard had blacklisted me. He told everyone in our social circle that I had suffered a mental breakdown and embezzled money, a lie so bold that people believed it. Friends I had known for decades stopped returning my calls. I was radioactive. I took a job as a night auditor at a cheap motel by the highway. It was the only place that didn't ask for references. Every night from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I sat behind a plexiglass barrier, checking in truckers and people who paid in cash for hourly rates. I wore a polyester uniform that scratched my skin. Depression hit me like a physical weight. There were nights I stared at the bottles of cleaning fluid in the janitor's closet and wondered if it would be easier to just drink them. I felt worthless. I was 42, divorced, broke, and living in squalor while my ex-husband was on the cover of Forbes magazine. But one night, at 3 a.m., a guest came in. He was an old man, looking disheveled, carrying a box of books. He couldn't pay for his room. "I have no cash," he said, his hands shaking. "But I have these books. Rare ones. Real estate law. Investment strategies." I paid for his room out of my own pocket. I don't know why. Maybe because I saw my own desperation in his eyes. He left the box of books on the counter. Out of boredom, I started reading one. Distressed Asset Management and Foreclosure Loopholes. It was dry, dense, and boring. But as I read, something flickered in my brain. My old self, the Wharton graduate, the financial wizard, woke up. I realized I understood this. I understood the language of debt, of liens, of leverage. I read all night. By dawn, I had finished 3 books. I started looking at the world differently. I wasn't just broke, I was a distressed asset myself. And distressed assets could be turned around. I started scouring the local paper for foreclosure listings. I found a small, fire-damaged condo 2 blocks from my terrible apartment. The owner was an elderly woman who had moved to a nursing home, and her kids were letting the place rot. The bank was about to seize it. I had $4,000 left of the severance money Richard gave me. It wasn't enough to buy a door, let alone a house. But I had knowledge now. I put on my one remaining good suit, a gray Armani I had saved from the trash bags. I tracked down the owner's son. I met him at a diner. He looked exhausted. "I can't pay you for the house," I told him straight up. "But the bank is going to take it in 2 weeks, and you'll get nothing. Worse, the foreclosure will ruin your credit." "So what do you want?" he asked suspiciously. "Sign the deed over to me subject to the existing mortgage," I said, using a term I learned from the books. "I will take over the payments immediately. I will fix it up in 3 months. When I sell it, I pay off the mortgage, and I give you 20% of the profit. You save your credit, you get cash, and you do no work." He looked at me. He saw a desperate woman in an expensive suit. But he also saw a way out. "Fine," he said. "It's your headache now." I worked the motel shift at night. During the day, I went to that condo. I tore up carpet that smelled of smoke. I scrubbed walls until my fingers bled. I learned to spackle from YouTube videos. I slept on the floor of the condo because it was cleaner than my apartment. I poured all my rage into that renovation. Every tile I laid was a curse word directed at Richard. Every wall I painted was me covering up the memory of his betrayal. 3 months later, I sold the condo. After paying off the mortgage and the owner's cut, I walked away with $28,000. It wasn't millions. But when I held that cashier's check, I cried. It was the first money I had made that was mine. Purely mine. No Richard. No lies. I looked at that check and I made a vow. I would never be dependent on anyone again. I would build a fortress of money so high that no man could ever scale it. They call it the snowball effect. I rolled that $28,000 into a duplex. I fixed it, rented one side, lived in the other, and refinanced it to buy a fourplex. I worked 20 hours a day. I stopped dating. I stopped watching TV. I became a machine. My diet consisted of coffee and ambition. I discovered I had a talent that Richard never had. I could see value where others saw ruin. I bought commercial warehouses in neighborhoods that everyone said were dead, knowing that the City Planning Commission was secretly rezoning them for art districts. I bought tax liens on waterfront properties that were tied up in legal battles, and I untangled the legal knots myself. I formed a company, Blue Sky Holdings. I kept my name off everything. I used registered agents. I was terrified Richard would find out I was making money and try to sue me for stealing his business secrets or some other nonsense. I wanted to be a ghost. By year 3, my net worth hit $2 million. By year 4, $5 million. I moved out of the duplex and bought a beautiful, secluded home in the hills. But I didn't change my lifestyle publicly. I still drove a modest SUV. I didn't go to the gala events where Richard and Tiffany were constantly photographed. I saw them sometimes, from a distance. One night, I was at a high-end steakhouse meeting a contractor. I saw Richard and Tiffany walk in. They were loud, flashy. Tiffany was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. Richard was berating a waiter for giving them the wrong table. I watched them from my booth in the shadows. I saw the way Richard drank, too fast, too much. I saw the way Tiffany kept checking her phone, bored. And I saw something else. I saw fear in Richard's eyes. It was subtle, but I knew him. He had the twitchy look of a man juggling too many lies. I went home that night and pulled his company's public records. Since I was now a sophisticated investor, I had access to reports that the average person didn't read. Sterling Logistics was rotting. The revenue was up, but the operating costs were astronomical. He was borrowing money to pay off borrowed money. It was a classic shell game. He was expanding into markets he didn't understand just to generate headlines. "He's going to crash," I whispered to my empty living room. I felt a strange sense of calm. I didn't need to push him. Gravity would do the work. But I wanted to be there when he hit the ground. I hired Brenda, the sharpest shark of a lawyer in the city. "Keep an eye on him," I told her. "Let me know when he starts getting desperate." "You still love him?" Brenda asked, eyeing me suspiciously over her glasses. "No," I said, sipping my tea. "I'm investing in his failure. It's strictly business." I met Harrison in the trenches. It was a foreclosure auction at the county courthouse. Most people there were sharks, loud, aggressive developers in cheap suits trying to intimidate each other. I was bidding on a dilapidated strip mall near the airport. I knew the airport was expanding, which would triple the land value. A man was standing in the back. He was tall, with silver fox hair and wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. He looked like a farmer who had wandered into the wrong room. When the bidding started, the sharks circled. But every time I bid, this man in the back would nod slightly to the auctioneer. He drove the price up, calm as a monk. Finally, at $800,000, the sharks dropped out. It was just me and the farmer. I looked back at him. He met my gaze. His eyes were intensely blue and filled with intelligence. He tipped an imaginary hat at me and stopped bidding. "Sold to the lady in the gray blazer." I walked up to him afterward. "Why did you stop?" I asked. "You clearly had the money." "I did," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "But I realized who you were. You're the one who turned around the Miller Warehouse project. I admire your work." I was stunned. "You know my work?" "I keep tabs on the competition," he smiled. "I'm Harrison Bennett." My jaw dropped. Harrison Bennett was a legend. He was a billionaire developer who owned half the skyline, but no one ever saw him. He was famously reclusive. "You're Harrison Bennett?" I stared at his flannel shirt. "I like to be comfortable," he shrugged. "Let me buy you coffee. You overpaid for that strip mall by about 5%, by the way." "I didn't," I countered immediately. "The airport expansion announcement goes public next Tuesday. The value will jump 40%. He threw his head back and laughed. I like you. You do your homework. We went for coffee. We talked for 4 hours. We didn't talk about the weather or celebrities. We talked about zoning laws, interest rates, and the ethical implications of gentrification. It was the most romantic conversation of my life. Harrison was a widower. He had lost his wife 10 years ago and had thrown himself into work to cope. He understood pain. He understood the need to build walls. You wear your armor well, Meredith, he told me on our third date. But you don't need it with me. It took me a year to let him in. I was so damaged by Richard that I flinched every time Harrison was nice to me. I kept waiting for the manipulation. I kept waiting for him to ask for money, or credit, or my soul. But he never did. He was independently whole. He didn't need me, he wanted me. One night, lying by the fire in his cabin, I told him the whole story about Richard. I told him about the pawnshop. I told him about the eviction. Harrison didn't get angry. He got quiet. A dangerous, protective kind of quiet. He tried to break you, Harrison said softly, stroking my hair. But he just tempered the steel. You're stronger than he will ever be. I still hate him, I admitted. Good, Harrison said. Hate is a powerful fuel. Just don't let it burn the engine. When the invitation arrived that morning, Harrison didn't try to talk me out of my revenge. He knew. He understood that this wasn't about pettiness. It was about balance. It was about the universe finally correcting a rounding error. After the call with Harrison, I drove straight to Brenda's office. I needed intel. Oakhaven, Brenda said, looking at the invitation. You just bought this. Like, the wire transfer cleared at 11 a.m. I know, I paced around her office. Richard thinks he's renting it from the Van der Hoeven family. He doesn't know the property changed hands. Okay, Brenda cracked her knuckles. Let's see what kind of contract he signed. Since I was the owner, I now had access to the files from the property management company. Brenda logged into the secure server. Here it is, she muttered, scrolling through the PDF. Event contract for Sterling/Banks wedding. Total cost, $250,000 for the weekend buyout. He doesn't have that kind of cash, I said. I saw his liquidity report last month. You're right. Look at the payment schedule. Brenda pointed to the screen. He paid a non-refundable deposit of $50,000. The remaining $200,000 is due 48 hours before the event. That's tomorrow at 5 p.m., I checked my watch. But wait, there's an addendum, Brenda frowned. This is interesting. He requested a payment extension. He claimed he's waiting for an international wire transfer. The old owners, the Van der Hoevens, were desperate for cash, so they agreed to let him pay the final balance on the morning of the wedding. Why would they do that? Because he offered collateral. Brenda clicked open a scanned document. Look at this. I leaned in. My breath hitched. It was a lien. A voluntary lien against his house, the house he had kicked me out of. He mortgaged the house for the wedding? I asked, stunned. He's gambling, Brenda said. He's betting that he'll close some big investor at the wedding to pay off the venue fee. It's a Ponzi move. He's using the wedding to look rich so he can get money to pay for the wedding. He's putting Tiffany and himself on the street for a party, I whispered. The level of delusion was terrifying. And here's the best part, Brenda grinned, showing her teeth. The contract has a change of ownership clause. It says that if the property is sold, the new owner has the right to review and renegotiate terms if the client is in default of any payment schedule. Since he missed the original 48-hour deadline and asked for an extension, he is technically in default. Meaning? Meaning you can demand the full payment immediately. Or cancel the event. No, I said instantly. I don't want to cancel. I want him to have the wedding. You want him to have the wedding? Brenda looked confused. I want him to have the ceremony, I corrected. I want him to stand up there, say his vows, think he's won. And then I want to pull the rug out. You're diabolical, Brenda laughed. I love it. But Meredith, there's more. While digging into his financials to check the house lien, I found something else. The debt on his company? Sterling Logistics? Yeah. The primary lender is First City Bank. They've categorized his loan as toxic. They are looking to sell the debt to a collection agency for pennies on the dollar just to get it off their books. I looked at Brenda. A light bulb exploded in my head. How much is the debt? $4 million. But the bank would probably take $2 million cash just to walk away. I looked at my bank account app on my phone. I had the liquidity. It was a lot of money, a huge chunk of my war chest. But if I bought the debt? If I buy the debt, I said slowly, I become his primary creditor. I would own his company. I could force a liquidation. You could taking everything, Brenda confirmed. His desks, his computers, his car, his patents. You would own him. I stood up. Get the bank on the phone. I want to buy a bad loan. The meeting at First City Bank the next morning was tense. I walked in wearing a black power suit, flanked by Harrison and Brenda. The bank executive, Mr. Henderson, looked sweaty. He clearly knew Sterling Logistics was a sinking ship and was shocked anyone wanted to buy a ticket on the Titanic. Ms. Morgan, he said, wiping his forehead. You understand that this debt is non-performing? Mr. Sterling hasn't made a full interest payment in 3 months. You are buying a liability. I am aware, I said coolly. I see value in the underlying assets. What assets? Henderson scoffed. The software is outdated. The asset, I said, looking him in the eye, is the satisfaction of foreclosure. Harrison squeezed my hand under the table. He knew I was risking a lot. $2 million was real money. If I couldn't liquidate Richard's assets fast enough, I could lose a fortune. Are you sure? Harrison whispered. I've never been more sure, I whispered back. I signed the papers. The wire transfer was initiated. Ping. My phone buzzed. The notification from my bank. Transaction complete. I now owned Richard Sterling. I owned his debt. I owned his wedding venue. I owned the roof over his head. We walked out of the bank into the blinding sunlight. I felt lighter than air. We have 24 hours until the wedding, Brenda checked her watch. What's the play? First, I said, we need to update the staff at Oakhaven. They need to know who their new boss is. But they must be sworn to absolute secrecy. If Richard finds out I own the place before the ceremony begins, he might run. I'll handle the NDAs, Brenda said. I'll make sure the staff knows that if they whisper a word to the groom, they're fired. Good. Harrison and I will head to the estate tonight. We'll stay in the owner's cottage on the edge of the property. We'll watch the setup. And the dress? Harrison asked, opening the car door. Oh, I smiled, a smile that felt sharp enough to cut glass. The dress is ready. It's green. Green? The color of money, I said. And the color of the monster he created. As we drove toward Cape Cod, I watched the scenery fly by. I thought about the girl crying in the Walmart parking lot. I thought about the woman scrubbing toilets in a motel. I wasn't doing this just for revenge. I was doing it for her. For the version of me that was powerless. I was going back to that wedding to rescue my past self. Richard thought he was inviting a victim to his wedding. He didn't know he had just sent a VIP pass to his own executioner. "Ready?" Harrison asked as we pulled up to the massive iron gates of Oakhaven. I looked up at the sign. "Private property." "My property." "More than ready," I said. "Let the show begin." The morning of the wedding dawned with a sky so blue it looked painted. From the window of the owner's cottage, a charming, secluded stone house on the edge of the Oakhaven estate that Richard didn't even know existed, I watched the chaos unfold. I saw the delivery trucks struggling up the gravel driveway. I saw the florists running around in a panic because Richard had apparently ordered 3 times the amount of hydrangeas the pergola could hold. I saw the caterers arguing with the wedding planner. It was a disaster in the making, fueled by a groom who cared more about excess than elegance. Harrison was in the kitchen, making us breakfast. He was calm, a steady rock in the middle of the storm I was about to unleash. "You're pacing," he noted, handing me a cup of coffee. "I'm not pacing," I lied, taking the mug. "I'm strategizing." "Meredith," he touched my arm. "The trap is set. The debt is bought. The venue is yours. The staff has been briefed. There is nothing left to do but get dressed." Getting dressed. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But for a woman about to face the man who destroyed her life, getting dressed is not just putting on clothes. It is putting on armor. I went into the bedroom where the garment bag hung. I unzipped it slowly. The dress was a masterpiece. I had found it in a small atelier in Milan during a business trip last year. It was emerald green silk, the color of money, the color of envy, the color of life returning after a long winter. It was cut on the bias, draping over every curve like liquid water. The neckline was a deep V that was daring but sophisticated, and the back plunged low, exposing skin I had spent years hiding in oversized sweaters. I slipped into it. The silk was cool against my skin. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the frumpy, exhausted housewife Richard had discarded. She wasn't the desperate divorcee scrubbing motel toilets. She was powerful. Her shoulders were back. Her eyes were clear. I put on the jewelry. Not the cheap costume jewelry Richard used to buy me to apologize for missing anniversaries. I put on a pair of vintage diamond drop earrings I had bought for myself at a Christie's auction. They were heavy, substantial. They whispered, "I don't need a man to buy me diamonds." I did my own makeup. I didn't want a stylist. I wanted to see my own face as I applied the war paint. A sharp-winged eyeliner. A deep, blood-red lip. When I walked out into the living room, Harrison stopped mid-sip of his coffee. He stood up slowly. He was wearing his tuxedo, a midnight blue velvet that made his silver hair look even more distinguished. He looked like a king. "My God," he whispered. "He's going to have a heart attack before we even get to the foreclosure." "Good," I said, smoothing the silk over my hips. "I want him to see exactly what he threw away. I want him to see that while he was chasing a 20-year-old dream, he let go of a reality that could have built him an empire." "Are you nervous?" Harrison asked, offering me his arm. "No," I said, and for the first time in 5 years, I meant it. "I'm not nervous. I'm inevitable." We walked out to the car. Harrison had arranged for a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom to pick us up from the cottage and drive us the quarter-mile to the main house. It was theatrical, yes. But Richard loved theater. I was just giving him the opening act he deserved. As the car purred down the driveway, hidden by the ancient oak trees, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. This wasn't just revenge. This was an exorcism. I was driving into the heart of my past to burn it down, so my future could finally rise from the ashes. Part 10: The Arrival. The main driveway of Oakhaven was lined with cars that Richard couldn't afford. I saw leased Porsches, rented Lamborghinis. It looked like a car dealership exploded. It was so Richard, all flash, no substance. Our Rolls-Royce glided through the chaos like a shark moving through a school of minnows. The valet, a young man named Leo who was actually on my payroll as of yesterday, opened the door before the car even fully stopped. "Welcome to Oakhaven, Ms. Morgan," he said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. He winked. He knew. I stepped out. The silence that fell over the entrance was immediate and absolute. There were about 50 people mingling near the champagne tower. I recognized most of them. They were the friends who had ghosted me after the divorce. The women who had whispered that I was crazy. The men who had laughed at Richard's jokes about his frigid ex-wife. I stood there for a moment, letting the sun hit the emerald silk of my dress. I let them look. I saw Susan, my former best friend, drop her purse. She was wearing a beige dress that looked washed out next to the vibrancy of the gardens. Her mouth hung open. I saw Tom, Richard's CFO, the man who had helped him hide the assets from me during the divorce. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He was staring at Harrison, his eyes widening as he recognized the billionaire standing protectively at my side. Harrison placed a hand on the small of my back. "Shall we?" We walked up the stone steps. The crowd parted. Literally parted. It was biblical. "Meredith?" Susan stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Is that you?" I stopped and looked at her. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at her with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bug. "Hello, Susan," I said, my voice smooth and rich. "Lovely to see you. You look comfortable." It was the southern insult of the century. Comfortable. "You look incredible," Susan stammered, her eyes darting to the diamonds in my ears. "We heard you were, well, Richard said you were struggling." "Richard says a lot of things," I said, glancing around the opulent courtyard that I owned. "I've been busy." "Is that Harrison Bennett?" Tom whispered, leaning in, ignoring his wife. "The Harrison Bennett? Real estate mogul?" "Harrison," I introduced him without turning my head. "This is Tom. He used to do Richard's books. Before the audit problems." Tom turned pale. I knew about the audit problems because I owned the debt now. I knew everything. We continued moving through the crowd. I heard the whispers erupt behind us like a brush fire. "Did you see her dress? Is that really Meredith? She's with Bennett. They say he's worth $3 billion. I thought she was working at a motel." I drank it in. Every whisper was a deposit in my emotional bank account. The venue was decorated to within an inch of its life. White roses everywhere. Crystal chandeliers hanging from the trees. It was beautiful, I had to admit. But it felt hollow. It felt like a movie set, pretty from the front, but held together with plywood and debt in the back. We made our way to the terrace where the ceremony seating was arranged. I didn't look for a seat in the back, as Richard had suggested. I walked straight to the front row, the side traditionally reserved for the groom's family. There was a beautifully printed card on the seat, reserved for Sterling family. I picked up the card, looked at it, and handed it to a passing waiter. "I'll be sitting here," I said. "But ma'am," the waiter started, then he looked at me. He saw the way I held myself. He saw the owner's authority in my eyes, even if he didn't know the official title yet. "Of course, ma'am. Can I get you a glass of champagne?" "Two," Harrison said, sitting down next to me. "And keep the bottle nearby." I sat down in the front row, crossing my legs, the emerald silk creating a splash of color against the white chairs. I was center stage. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. 10 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to start, she appeared. "Tiffany." She wasn't in her wedding dress yet, she was wearing a silk robe with bride bedazzled on the back in pink rhinestones. She was storming through the garden, screaming at a florist about the shade of the petals, when she saw me. She froze. Then, she marched over, her heels sinking into the grass. She was beautiful, in a manufactured way. Heavy extensions, spray tan, teeth whitened to a blinding shade. But up close, I saw the stress lines around her eyes. She looked tired. Being Richard's wife was a full-time job of managing his ego and his lies. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the other guests wouldn't hear. "And why are you sitting in the front row?" "Richard invited me," I said calmly, taking a sip of champagne. "And the invitation didn't specify a seat. I assume since I paid for the foundation of Richard's career, I count as family." "You look ridiculous," Tiffany sneered, looking me up and down. "Trying to dress like you have money. Is that a rental? Or did you find a sugar daddy?" She glanced at Harrison, who was reading emails on his phone, completely ignoring her. "Actually," I said, setting my glass down, "I prefer to buy. Rentals are so unstable. You never know when the owner might want their property back." The double meaning flew right over her head. "You're just jealous," Tiffany laughed, a brittle sound. "Look around, Meredith. Look at this estate. Richard rented the whole thing. It cost a fortune. This is the life he wanted. He wanted luxury. He wanted youth. He didn't want a boring, old accountant." "Luxury is expensive, Tiffany," I said softly. "Are you sure he can afford it?" "Richard is a CEO," she snapped. "Of course he can afford it. He's buying me a Porsche for a wedding gift." "What did he ever give you? A blender?" "He gave me a hard time," I admitted. "But he also gave me the motivation to become the woman sitting in front of you. So, in a way, I should thank you. If you hadn't slept with him, I might still be stuck in that suburban hell, clipping coupons." Tiffany's face turned red. "You're pathetic. You're here to beg, aren't you? You want alimony?" "I don't need his money, sweetie," I smiled. "I have my own. And unlike Richard's, mine is real." "Get out of my seat," she demanded. "This is for his mother." "His mother refused to come," I reminded her. "She hates you. Remember? She told you that at Christmas." Tiffany flinched. It was a low blow, but accurate. Richard's mother was a devout woman who considered Tiffany a homewrecker. "Just stay out of the way," Tiffany growled. "This is my day. My estate for the weekend. My fairy tale. Don't ruin it with your bad vibes." "Your estate," I repeated, tasting the irony. "Careful with that word, Tiffany. Possession is 9/10 of the law. But the other 1/10? That's the part that bites." She stomped away, her rhinestone bride logo shimmering in the sun. I watched her go with a pang of pity. She was me, 15 years ago. Believing the lies. Defending the indefensible. Thinking she had won a prize, when she had actually stepped into a trap. "She has no idea," Harrison murmured, not looking up from his phone. "None," I said. "She thinks she's marrying a king. She doesn't know she's marrying a pauper in a stolen crown." 5 minutes later, Richard appeared. He was walking from the groomsmen's holding area toward the bar, looking for liquid courage. He looked good, I had to admit. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, his hair perfectly coiffed. But he was sweating. Profusely. He was scanning the crowd, smiling tightly, shaking hands. He was playing the part of the benevolent billionaire. Then, his eyes landed on me. He stopped mid-stride. He almost dropped his drink. I saw the recognition hit him. He took in the dress. The diamonds. The posture. He looked confused, like his brain couldn't reconcile the memory of the broken woman in the rain with the vision sitting in his front row. Then he looked at Harrison. I saw the blood drain from his face. Richard was in tech and logistics, but he knew who Harrison Bennett was. Everyone in business knew who Harrison Bennett was. Harrison was the money man. The guy you went to when the bank said no. The guy who could buy and sell Richard's company 10 times over before breakfast. Richard abandoned his path to the bar and beelined for us. He forgot about his guests. He forgot about his bride. He smelled money. Meredith, he said, breathless, coming up to our seats. You came. You invited me, Richard, I said, looking up at him through my lashes. I wouldn't miss it. And you brought company. He turned to Harrison, extending a sweaty hand. Mr. Bennett. I can't believe it. Richard Sterling. Sterling Logistics. It's an honor, sir. A true honor. Harrison looked at the hand, then looked at Richard's face. He didn't move. I'm here as Meredith's guest, Harrison said coolly. We're not here to talk business, Richard. We're here to watch you commit. Richard retracted his hand, wiping it on his pants. He was vibrating with nervous energy. He was trying to figure out the angle. Why was his ex-wife with a billionaire? Was I a secretary? A consultant? You look different, Meredith, Richard said, his eyes darting to my necklace. He recognized the quality. Did you get a new job? I did, I said. I'm in asset management now. Asset management? Really? That's cute. Good for you. Starting small? Something like that, I smiled. Listen, Richard leaned in, lowering his voice, ignoring the fact that his wedding was starting in 10 minutes. Mr. Bennett. Harrison, since you're here. I have an opportunity. A pivot in our logistics AI. It's going to be huge. We're opening a Series C round next week. I'd love to pitch you. Maybe we could step into my office inside for 5 minutes after the ceremony? I watched him with disgust. It was his wedding day. His bride was waiting. And he was hustling for cash because he knew he was broke. Richard, I interrupted. Don't you have a wedding to get to? Yeah, of course, he waved a hand dismissively. But business never sleeps, right, Harrison? What do you say? Just 5 minutes? I don't think you want to pitch me, son, Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave. I have a very strict policy on due diligence. And I usually find things people try to hide. Richard paled. Right. Sure. Well, enjoy the ceremony. Oakhaven is magnificent, isn't it? Cost me a fortune, but nothing's too good for Tiffany. I practically had to buy the place to get this date. He laughed nervously. I practically bought the place. I looked him dead in the eye. It is a lovely property, Richard. Be careful with it. The owners are very particular. Oh, I have the owners in my pocket, he winked, regaining his bravado. They love me. He walked away, adjusting his bow tie, thinking he had just made a connection. He thought he was charming Harrison. He didn't realize he was a mouse dancing in front of 2 cobras. He's desperate, Harrison noted. He smells like fear and cheap cologne. He's trying to find a lifeline, I said. He thinks you're a life raft. He doesn't know you're the anchor. The music started. The bridal march began. It was time for the show. The ceremony was a spectacle of narcissism. Tiffany walked down the aisle to a pop song played by a string quartet. She looked beautiful, but her smile was tight. As she passed me, she glared. I raised my glass slightly in a silent toast. Richard stood at the altar, sweating through his custom suit. He kept glancing at Harrison, not his bride. He was mentally calculating how much money he could extract from my boyfriend. The officiant began to speak about trust, honesty, and building a foundation together. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Trust? Honesty? Richard had lied about his assets, his fidelity, and his solvency. The entire wedding was a lie. The flowers were likely on credit. The champagne was probably billed to a company account that was already overdrawn. When it came time for the vows, Richard pulled out a piece of paper. "Tiffany," he said, his voice projecting for the cameras. He had hired a videography crew, of course. "You are my muse. You are the fresh start I needed. Before you, my life was gray. It was monochrome. You brought color. You brought success. I promise to give you the world, because you deserve nothing less than a kingdom." He was rewriting history again. Erasing me. Calling our 15 years gray. I felt a hand squeeze mine. Harrison. He knew. He knew that gray life was the life where I worked 2 jobs so Richard could eat. Then it was Tiffany's turn. "Richard," she choked up, tears ruining her spray tan. "You are the most successful, powerful man I know. You saved me from a boring life. I promise to stand by your side as we conquer the world. I promise to be the wife a CEO needs." The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. She was promising to be a CEO's wife, unaware that the CEO was about to be unemployed. She was marrying a title, not a man. "If anyone here has any reason why these two should not be joined," the officiant asked, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence stretched. I saw Richard tense up. He looked at me. For a split second, I saw terror in his eyes. He thought I was going to stand up and scream about the affair. He thought I was going to make a scene about the past. I didn't move. I sat perfectly still, a serene smile on my face. "Oh no, Richard," I thought. "I'm not going to stop the wedding. I need you to be married. I need you to be legally bound to each other so that when the ship sinks, you both go down together." He exhaled, visibly relieved. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." They kissed. The guests cheered. Petals were thrown. Richard grabbed Tiffany's hand and marched back down the aisle, pumping his fist in the air like he had just won the Super Bowl. As he passed me, he winked. A cocky, arrogant wink that said, "I won. I got the girl, the money, and the venue." I watched his back as he walked away. "Enjoy the walk, Richard," I whispered. "It's a long way down from here." The guests stood up to move to the reception tent. I remained seated for a moment. "Are you okay?" Harrison asked. "I'm fine," I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. "The play is over. Now, the reality begins." We moved toward the massive white tent set up on the great lawn. Inside, tables were set with crystal and silver. It was a dinner for 200 people. At $300 a plate, by my estimation. I walked to the table chart. I wasn't on it. Of course not. I was a last-minute addition. But the maitre d', my employee, was waiting. "Ms. Morgan," he whispered. "We've set a private table for you and Mr. Bennett. Center stage. Right in front of the head table." "Perfect," I said. We sat down. The dinner service began. The wine flowed. Richard and Tiffany sat at the head table on a raised platform, looking like royalty. Richard was already drunk, laughing too loudly, his hand constantly on Tiffany's thigh. I watched him. I waited. According to the contract Brenda had uncovered, the final payment for the catering and the venue balance was due upon the commencement of the dinner service. I looked at my watch. 7 p.m. I saw the catering manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, walk up to the head table. She held a credit card machine. It was time. The music was loud, a jazz band playing upbeat covers, so most people didn't notice Mrs. Higgins approaching Richard. But I was watching like a hawk. I saw Richard wave her away, annoyed. Not now, I could read his lips. Mrs. Higgins didn't move. She leaned in and whispered something. Richard rolled his eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a black credit card. He threw it on the table with a gesture that said, "Don't bother me with trifles." Mrs. Higgins picked it up. She inserted it into the portable machine. We waited. She looked at the screen. She shook her head. She whispered to Richard again. Richard frowned. He snatched the card back and handed her another one. A platinum one. She tried it. She shook her head again. I saw the color drain from Richard's face even from 30 feet away. He stood up, knocking his chair back. He was shouting now, loud enough to be heard over the band. "Run it again. There's a limit, you idiot. You have to split the charge." The music faltered. The band leader looked confused. The guests nearest the head table stopped eating. "Sir," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice projecting with practiced calm. "I have run 3 cards. They are all declining. The bank code is pickup card or insufficient funds." "That's impossible," Richard roared. "I am Richard Sterling. My company is worth millions. Your machine is broken." "My machine works fine, sir. We need the final payment of $200,000 immediately, or we cease service." The room went deadly silent. 200 guests watched the groom arguing about his bill. Tiffany grabbed Richard's arm. "Richard, what is going on? Pay the woman." "I'm trying," he snapped at her. "Their system is garbage." He looked around the room, his eyes wild. He was looking for a savior. His eyes landed on Harrison. "Harrison!" Richard shouted, jumping off the stage. He ran over to our table. "Harrison, buddy. My cards, there's a fraud hold or something. Banks, right? Nightmare. Could you cover this? Just for tonight? I'll wire you the money first thing Monday with interest. Double interest." The audacity was staggering. He was asking my boyfriend to pay for his wedding to his mistress. Harrison slowly cut a piece of steak and put it in his mouth. He chewed deliberately. "I don't think so, Richard," Harrison said calmly. "Please." Richard was sweating, desperation pouring off him. "It's humiliating. Everyone is watching." "Yes," I spoke up, sipping my wine. "They are." Richard turned to me. "Meredith, do you still have that savings account? The joint one? Help me out here. For old time's sake. Don't let them ruin my wedding." "I don't have a joint account with you, Richard," I said. "You emptied it 5 years ago. Remember? I'll buy this place." Richard screamed at Mrs. Higgins, spinning around. "I'll buy this whole damn estate and fire every one of you. Do you know who I am?" "We know who you are, sir," Mrs. Higgins said coldly. "And we know you don't own this estate." "I will," he blustered. "I have a deal with the owners." "The owners?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Which owners are those, Richard?" "The Van der Hovens," he yelled. "I'm their favorite client." I stood up. I placed my napkin on the table. I picked up my wineglass. "Actually," I said, projecting my voice to the back of the tent, "you might want to check your facts. I walked toward the stage. My heels clicked on the dance floor. Click. 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 The sound of doom approaching. I stepped up onto the platform. I took the microphone from the stunned band leader. "Hello everyone," I said. The feedback whined for a second, then cleared. "For those who don't know me, I'm Meredith Morgan. Richard's first wife. The one he traded in." Whispers exploded in the room. Tiffany stood up, looking ready to attack me. "Get off the stage." "Sit down, Tiffany," I said, my voice commanding. "This concerns the roof over your head." I turned to Richard. He looked like a cornered rat. "Richard," I said, holding his gaze. "You keep saying you're going to buy this place. You keep threatening to fire the staff. But there's a problem with that plan." I reached into my purse, which I had carried with me, and pulled out the deed. "The Van der Hovens don't own Oakhaven anymore," I said, holding the document up. "I do." Richard froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I bought Oakhaven yesterday," I continued, pacing slowly around him. "Every brick. Every blade of grass. Every wine glass you're drinking from. It's mine." "Blue Sky Holdings?" "That's me, Richard." "No," he whispered. You're lying." "Am I?" I signaled to Mrs. Higgins. She nodded respectfully at me. "Mrs. Higgins, who signs your paycheck now?" "You do, Ms. Morgan," she said clearly. So, I turned back to Richard. "Here is the situation. You are holding a party in my house. You have failed to pay the bill. Your cards are declined because, well, let's be honest. You're broke." "I'm not broke," he screamed. "My company." "Your company?" I laughed. "Oh, right. Sterling Logistics. I stopped by the bank this morning, Richard." "First City Bank?" He flinched as if I had hit him. "They were very eager to unload your toxic debt. $2 million in defaulted loans. Guess who bought it?" I pulled another document from my purse. "The assignment of debt. I own your debt, Richard. I am your primary creditor. Which means, essentially, I own your company. I own your patents. I own your office furniture. And thanks to that lien you signed to secure this venue." I paused for effect. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "I own your house. The one you kicked me out of. The one you're living in with her." I pointed at Tiffany. She looked sick. "So, to recap," I said cheerfully. "You are at a wedding you can't pay for, in a venue owned by your ex-wife, living in a house owned by your ex-wife, running a company owned by your ex-wife." I leaned in close to his face. "You wanted to show me what true happiness looks like, Richard? Is this it? Is this happiness? Because it looks a lot like bankruptcy to me." He stared at me, his eyes hollow. The arrogance was gone. The ego was gone. He was just a small, scared man in a suit he didn't own. If you are enjoying this story and you want to see Richard get exactly what he deserves, I looked directly at the videographer's camera, breaking the fourth wall of his perfect wedding video. Please hit the like button on this video and comment the number 1 below. Let me know you're with me. Because we are not done yet. Comment 1 if you're ready for the finale. I turned back to Richard. "By the way," I said, dropping the mic to my side. "Since you are in default on the venue contract, and since I am the owner, I am exercising my right to cancel this event. Immediately." I looked at the guests. "Get out," I said calmly. "The party is over." Pandemonium broke out. Guests started scrambling for their purses and coats. No one wanted to be associated with a fraud. The investors Richard had been wooing were the first to run, checking their phones, probably calling their lawyers to pull any funds they had promised. Tiffany let out a scream that sounded like a banshee. She turned on Richard, pounding her fists on his chest. "You lied to me," she shrieked. "You said you were rich. You said you owned the house. I signed a prenup based on your assets." "Tiffany, baby, please," Richard begged, trying to catch her hands. "I can fix this. It's just a cash flow problem." "It's not a cash flow problem," she yelled. "It's a Meredith problem. She owns everything. You're nothing." She ripped the diamond ring off her finger, a ring I now knew was probably bought on credit, and threw it at his face. It bounced off his forehead and skittered across the floor. "I'm leaving," she announced. She grabbed her skirt and stormed off the stage, pushing past guests. Richard stood alone on the stage, the ruins of his life crashing down around him. He looked at me. His eyes filled with tears. "Meredith," he choked out. "Please. Don't do this. I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry about the affair. I'm sorry about the house. Just give me a chance. Don't foreclose. Don't liquidate the company. I built it. We built it," I corrected him. "And you stole it. Now I'm taking it back." Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights flashed against the white tent fabric. Richard looked at the entrance in horror. Did you call the police?" he whispered. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't call the police. But Brenda, my lawyer? She sent your updated financials to the SEC and the district attorney this morning. Ponzi schemes are illegal, Richard. Lying to investors is fraud." 2 officers and a man in a suit, likely FBI, walked into the tent. They spotted Richard on the stage. "Richard Sterling?" the agent called out. Richard looked for a place to run. There was nowhere to go. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement," the agent said, walking up the steps. They cuffed him. Right there in his tuxedo. Right there in front of his fleeing guests. As they dragged him past me, he looked at me one last time. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you wait 5 years?" "I was compounding the interest," I said coldly. They took him away. The tent emptied out until it was just the staff, Harrison, and me. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't sad. It was clean. It felt like the air after a thunderstorm. I looked at the empty tables, the half-eaten food, the discarded flowers. "Well," I said, letting out a long breath. "That was dramatic." Harrison walked up to the stage. He took my hand and helped me down. "You are magnificent," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "Terrifying, but magnificent." "Do you think I went too far?" I asked, looking at the door where Richard had exited in handcuffs. "He dug the hole, Meredith," Harrison said. "You just kicked the ladder away." We walked out of the tent and into the garden. The moon had risen over the estate. The air was cool and crisp. The nightmare was over. Richard couldn't hurt me anymore. He couldn't mock me. He was gone. I felt a sudden lightness, like a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The anger that had fueled me for 5 years was evaporating, leaving space for something else. "So," Harrison said, stopping by the fountain. "You own a wedding venue now." "I do," I laughed. "It's a good investment. Provided the grooms actually pay their bills." "It's a beautiful spot," Harrison looked around. "Ideally suited for a wedding. It would be a shame to waste the reservation." I looked at him. He was standing in the moonlight, looking handsome and solid and real. He wasn't a project. He wasn't a fixer-upper. He was a partner. What are you saying? I asked, my heart starting to beat faster. Harrison reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a flashy box. He pulled out a simple, velvet pouch. He got down on one knee. Meredith, he said. I've watched you rebuild yourself from ash. I've watched you fight for your dignity. I've watched you become the most formidable woman I know. I don't want to save you. You don't need saving. I want to stand next to you while you conquer the world. He opened the pouch. Inside was a ring. It wasn't a massive, gaudy diamond like Tiffany's. It was a sapphire, deep, blue, and solid. Surrounded by diamonds. It was classy. It was timeless. Will you marry me? He asked. And I promise, I'll pay for the venue. I laughed, tears finally spilling over. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. Yes, I whispered. Yes, Harrison. I will. He stood up and kissed me. It wasn't a showy kiss for an audience. It was a kiss for us. We danced there in the moonlight, to the sound of the crickets, on the estate that I owned, wearing the ring of a man who truly loved me. I had reclaimed my past, and in doing so, I had secured my future. It has been 1 year since the wedding from hell, as the local papers called it. A lot has changed. Richard is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a minimum security prison for fraud. He calls me sometimes, asking for money for the commissary. I don't answer. Sterling Logistics was liquidated. I stripped it for parts. I sold the patents to a competitor for a healthy profit, paid off the legitimate creditors, and kept the rest. I foreclosed on the house. I didn't keep it. It had too many bad memories. I bulldozed it. Literally. I hired a crew and watched them knock it down. I sold the land to a family who built a playground there. It felt like a cleansing. As for Tiffany, she learned the hard way that being a trophy wife requires a trophy winner. Without Richard's money, she had no skills and no degree. The last I heard, she was working as a hostess at a chain restaurant in Ohio, living with her parents. She tried to sue me, but Brenda laughed her out of court in 10 minutes. Harrison and I got married 6 months ago. We didn't do it at Oakhaven. We eloped to Italy, just the two of us. No cameras. No drama. Just love. I kept Oakhaven, though. I turned it into a retreat center for women, specifically for women who are rebuilding their lives after divorce or financial abuse. We teach them financial literacy, real estate investing, and legal self-defense. I call it the Phoenix Project. Every time I walk through the gates, I remember the night I took my power back. I remember the look on Richard's face when he realized he had underestimated me. To everyone listening to this story, especially the women who feel like they are drowning, who feel like they are too old, or too broken, or too late. You are not expired. You are not invisible. And you are not done. Take your pain and turn it into power. Take your grief and turn it into gold. Don't just survive your enemies. Outgrow them. Out-earn them. And if they invite you to their wedding to humiliate you? Go. But make sure you own the venue first. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this ride, please like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend who needs a reminder of her own strength. You never know who is planning their comeback right now. Until next time, stay strong and stay wealthy. As the story comes to a close, it leaves us with a powerful reminder: resilience is not just about surviving, it's about thriving. Meredith's journey teaches us that even in the darkest moments, we hold the power to rewrite our own story. Life may knock us down, but it's our choice to rise, stronger and wiser, and to turn pain into purpose. Her transformation from betrayal and loss into empowerment is proof that growth often comes from adversity. Beyond the revenge and justice, this story highlights the importance of self-worth and the courage to reclaim it. Meredith didn't just fight back, she rebuilt herself, brick by brick, creating a life that reflects her strength, independence, and vision. It's a testament to the fact that our value doesn't depend on anyone else's validation, it comes from recognizing our own potential and refusing to settle for less than we deserve. Now, it's your turn. What did this story inspire in you? Share your thoughts below or simply comment good if you found value in its lessons. Let's celebrate the power within us to rise above and create a life we're proud of.